with what we can call a special episode of the FloTrack Podcast. Today, I am joined for a special interview with Susanna Sullivan, who finished 7th overall at the Chicago Marathon. She was the top American in the women's race there, 2:21:56 for a PR for her in that race. She's sponsored by Brooks. She dropped again, like I said, a big PR on Sunday, and I believe that was her first time under 2:22 as well, and has been really on the rise in U.S. elite women's distance running for quite some time. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.
All right. I know we're just like a few days removed now from the Chicago Marathon. How are you feeling? Is your body feeling okay? I think you told me before we started this that you actually went on a run this morning.
Yeah, I just did a really short run this morning just to feel things out. I actually kind of was getting the itch to run again, which I didn't expect I'd have for at least a week. And that's what I had talked about with my coach, that we would like maybe not run for a week. But this morning I felt good, and I ran 3 miles, and it's the best I felt as the first run back from a marathon. So that was encouraging. But I've been in the pool or just kind of walking around and just taking a little bit of a break the last several days. And my quads were pretty shot right after the race. So I needed that.
I can imagine so, and I think for good reason. I mean, shoot, 2:21:56, that's a big performance from you there, top American, like we mentioned earlier, to kick this off. Reflecting on it, a few days later, like I guess maybe take me through that race. Like, what was that strategy for you going in? And then how were you able to execute and come away with a sub 2:22 performance there?
Yeah, I was really happy with it. The training had gone really well the last couple of months. This time a year ago, I couldn't run. So, and then we were going to try to do the trials. My knee was more or less back to normal at that point, but then I got COVID. And so after that was when the training block really kind of started, like maybe like April-ish. We kind of took a little bit of time after to recover from COVID and, and just make sure that I had, was ready to go with the knee. And yeah, there'd just been kind of steady improvement. And I feel like, we don't do a lot of workouts that are exactly the same as workouts from previous cycles, but they're similar enough that I could tell that, things were better than when I had run 2:24 in London. So I came in feeling pretty confident that I was ready to run a pretty big PR. But I just wasn't really sure what that would look like. I was really hoping for, 2:22 was kind of the goal pace. And then I thought, like, if I run 2:22:01, I'll be kicking myself. So I feel very fortunate to have just snuck under there. Yeah, I think I maybe went out a little more aggressively than I should have. My quads, when they went, were in pretty rough shape. I feel like the last 4 or 5 miles I was really hurting. Just my legs. I felt like aerobically I was still pretty comfortable, but my legs were not were not there for it. But yeah, I mean, it was a positive split for sure. Because I did go out a little aggressively, but I was proud with as well as I held it together, given that the start was pretty aggressive.
Now, I know you, like you mentioned, you went out more aggressive than maybe you had planned on, but you still come back and run sub under that kind of that goal of 2:22 there. One thing I know you talked about, I think after the race a little bit, was just the pacer situation for you too as well. I know towards the end you were basically on your own. You were really trying to just fight there, by yourself without a group of pacers. Tell me like what the situation going into the race was like for you in terms of who was going to be pacing you, and then what ended up shaking out on the day.
Yeah, well, I ran Chicago in 2022, and I had learned from that experience that it's a very fluid situation. People say that they're going to do certain things, but then they wake up the morning of the race and they're either feeling great or they're not feeling great. And sometimes people don't always do what they say they're going to do. And so my coach and I had talked about that leading into the race, that, I was going to have to just, pay attention and make sure that whatever happened, whoever I latched onto, that it felt right. And we've done a lot of work around that pace in the last several months. So I was pretty comfortable that I would, even with adrenaline and all the hoopla of race morning, that I was going to be able to assess whether it was an intelligent choice. And so leading into the race, we had heard that it was Jackson Neff and Rory Linkletter were going to run. What I had heard was 70, 30 to 71. And we were like, that's perfect. And then the day before the race, it seemed like there was kind of a critical mass of women who wanted to run just a little bit slower than that, right? Around 2:23. And I know that I get really excited on race day and I love to compete. And I was not feeling confident that if we went out at 71:30 or 72, that I was going to be able to negative split in any substantial way. So I really wanted to have a more aggressive start and just kind of like suffer and hang on. So when I heard that they were planning on running a little bit slower, I knew that there was a good chance that I was just going to have to feel it out. And with Chicago being a mixed start with men and women starting together, which is different from when I ran my last PR at London, I was feeling pretty confident that like whatever happened, I would find somebody who was in that neighborhood. And so I had talked to Rory, and I had met Jackson the morning of the race just to make sure that I knew who I was kind of looking for. But I wasn't really aware. I should have been aware. The information was there. I just didn't know who was like the next fastest pace group. And it turned out that was Reed Buchanan. He was going for 2:20. And I'm not sure if anybody actually had told him that they were doing that. I think he just said, that's what I'm doing. If you want to take it. And so I linked up with Reed around 4.5-ish, because I had kind of calmed down from the excitement of the start. And he came along and said, we're 2:20, tuck in. And I was thinking, was it 100%? I hadn't really done the math. It felt right. But like if I'm being caught by 2:20 and we're, 4.5 miles in, I must have been running maybe on the aggressive side. But that was good. There was a group of maybe like 4 or 5 guys at that point when they caught up to me. And we ran together for, I knew that there was going to be a tailwind or I'd heard that there was going to be a tailwind from 25K to 35K. So when I kind of latched on with them, my plan was just to stay with them as long as I could, ideally to 25K, until, I could kind of be out on my own. And I feel like I did an okay job with staying attached. There was definitely some yo-yoing. And at one point, Reed told the guys, because whenever we would go through a water stop, there were guys that would like attach right onto the back of Reed and I would be off the side. And at one point he just said to them, like, I'm here to, like, as a pacer for the women, like, let her, like, she shouldn't be taking all the wind. So at that point, they kind of got in a V formation and I was able to tuck in for a mile or two. And that was a lot of fun. So I got a sense of what it would have felt like to have been like locked in with a pace group and kind of shepherded along. And it was fun, but I do feel like I did a lot of it kind of like I didn't maximize the drafting element of things. And so, I mean, it makes me excited for the next one, right? There's definitely room for improvement there. But I've never been in a race where like I had a pacer with me the whole time. So it was definitely a learning experience. And I kind of wished before I don't know, I 2:20 just seemed and still seems a little crazy, but I kind of wish I had talked to him just so I could have gotten a sense of what his plan was if nobody went with him, because it did seem like later on in the stages of it, I was the only female around him, so he was inclined to, help me out, even if that meant backing off of the 2:20. So it would have been helpful to have that conversation before, but I didn't really have 2:20 on my radar. So.
Well, nonetheless, you still had quite the big performance for yourself. And I think just across the board, obviously, it was a historic day in Chicago. We saw a woman go under 210. I mean, that's still crazy to think about. And if you look just at the history too, I mean, both of the world records have now happened in Chicago. You can look back. I mean, the American record set in Chicago, and I'm just kind of curious, like for you, that's also had plenty of success. I know you finished sixth, I believe, in 2022 at this race. What do you think it is about Chicago that makes it the perfect place for just good, successful, and historic runs?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to love about Chicago. I do really like the mixed start with men and women. I think that definitely benefits the women. There's just there were a lot of bodies to chase down at the end. And when I ran my previous PR in London, like there were not many of us out on the road. So that helps. The weather was awesome. I know it was like the humidity, like percentage was admittedly a little bit high, but it's always humid here in the DC area, so it didn't feel extremely humid or anything to me. But yeah, I think the weather was decent. I think the energy on the course was insane. I felt like it was more than in 2022. I don't know. There just seemed to be people everywhere on the course this year. So, um,
Well, I want to go back for a moment too. I know you talked about this briefly as we started this, but I want to call out too. A year ago you were suffering with I believe a broken kneecap there, and that was something that you had to recover from. And I know after you ran the Chicago Marathon at the press conference, I think you spent some time reflecting on just how far you've come since then. And I believe you called this build up to Chicago like a dream training block. For you, like, can you talk a little bit about that, just coming back from that injury, the journey to recovery, how you had to alter maybe your approach to going back to the marathon here and racing again? Because I thought that was really interesting to hear from you.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think it wasn't a dream in that like I was like nailing every workout. I feel like my coach does an awesome job of like just making tweaks to the workout on the fly so that I'm not getting discouraged. Like whether that's giving me more rest or, just adjusting the expectations or telling me like, this is supposed to feel this way. And so that I feel like just kind of helped me like maintain positive momentum emotionally, in the training cycle. But the dream element of it was just that like I was stuck in the pool there were some fits and starts of running and, tried to pull it together for the trials. But it was a very interrupted 7 months of training. And so I just came into this cycle thinking like something is going to go wrong. I just hope that it's something that I can manage, right? Like, a 2 week niggle or a 2 weeks thing rather than like a month-long thing. And so I think the dream component of it wasn't that I was just like smashing workouts. It was just that like I was able to consistently kind of stack workouts. And there wasn't like any major hiccup, which I didn't really expect because I just figured with 7 months off, my body was going to need time to adjust, to the different stressors. And just like I felt like my tendons and muscles weren't going to be on board with it right away. But like I said, my coach is really smart. He knows what he's doing. I definitely feel like he helped me make that transition back really well, and just super duper grateful that it all came together.
I also want to go back for a bit, even further past when you got your injury and were coming back. But I want to go all the way back to your collegiate days. So let's take a shift back here for a second. I know you competed collegiately at Notre Dame, but I believe I was just doing some digging, and I know you've said yourself that I believe you struggled with some injuries, and you had hoped maybe that it had gone a little bit differently from when you were in college. But you graduate, you move back to the DC area where you're from. And you eventually get back into chasing this this marathon dream, and continuing on running that way. Like for you, like what do you think motivated you to continue on post college and chase after some of those goals despite maybe not having maybe the collegiate career you're hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I love the sport. I love that like every day presents an opportunity to, like make yourself a little bit better. Um and I think in college, like I was able to over the course of the 4 years, I mean, I learned a ton. And I felt like even though it wasn't necessarily coming together on racing, I mean, I had some decent races, I had some decent seasons, but it was like nothing like what I've had since. Um, but I feel like I learned a ton, and my teammates were really, kind and motivational people who I learned a lot from, and I had good coaches. I learned a lot about strength work while I was there, but I felt like it was underwhelming, and I felt like I had a lot more to give. And so um, when I left, I wanted to kind of figure that out. And I also just think that I put a lot of pressure on myself. I feel like I've always been a worrier. And so I think when I got Notre Dame and slipped and fell on black ice my freshman year in December and fractured my pelvis. And I just felt like such an immense disappointment to my coaches. And I know, like, I mean, it was a mistake. And they were, as nice as was reasonable about it. But, I just felt like I had let them down. And I but I knew that I had more to give, and I wanted to see what that was. And when I left college, I feel like I kind of just chilled out a little bit. I feel like in feeling like a disappointment to my coaches, um, I think I just pressed a little too hard every day in practice for the next 3.5 years. I think there wasn't a lot of contrast between my easy and hard days. And I think I just kind of was like, I don't think it was, maybe it's my own fault, but I don't think it was anybody's fault really that I just kind of was burning the candle at both ends and it wasn't working for me. So when I left, I kind of figured out that like I needed to calm down, that I actually could handle higher mileage, which was convinced that I couldn't after my time at Notre Dame, because I couldn't handle high mileage if I was going to pound everything all day. But if there was some contrast between easy and hard days, I could rack up miles and I could get stronger. And even though the workouts were for the first several years after college were less intense than anything in college, I was able to string them together. And so in seeing that success, that was motivating. And so I feel fortunate that things have kind of fallen into place in such a way that I've been able to stay kind of emotionally invested and excited about the next thing. And yeah, I still feel like there's a lot to give. I feel like for several years after college, I wasn't training at a crazy, crazy high level. And so I'm optimistic that there's still room to give now. So.
And then I think, since you've graduated from Notre Dame too, I think a lot of people know you as a full-time, I believe, sixth grade math teacher. So you're juggling, training and running and competing along with being, a teacher. So what's that? I'm just curious because I know teachers, they do it all. I mean, they're working all the time. They're teaching these kids. Like, how do you balance that life? I mean, shoot, I know myself. I still run, like, but not nearly that same level. But I have a hard time balancing the work life and the running life myself.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot. And I feel like I've said many times, I feel very fortunate, but I do feel really fortunate to have a small group around me. My coach and I got married this summer, and but my husband and I have been together since high school. And so they really get it and they understand kind of the demands on my time. And I just feel like I have a very small but supportive group around me that helps me kind of keep things in perspective, reminds me that there are 24 hours in a day, that I actually do have time to do this when I start to get overwhelmed, that like the maths on like, you have to be at work for X number of hours and training takes X number of hours. You still have enough time to sleep and eat. But I think also just a reminder from both of them is just take one day at a time. Like if I do start to think about like how is this going to work? How am I going to continue doing this? It does get overwhelming. But if I just take it one day at a time and make sure that I'm disciplined on the weekend to make sure that I'm like ready to be as efficient as possible during the week. It's worked so far, but it is hard for sure. There have definitely been times where I've wondered if I could, like, how sustainable it was, but then we come back to that conversation of just take it, then take the next couple days, get through the next couple days, get through the next week. Um, and it's worked so far. And we did consider a couple months ago maybe doing this full time, but then there was a conversation of like, do you mess with the formula that that you've had success with? And I think the answer is probably no. I feel like um, like I feel like I'd probably end up overtraining if I had more time. So. Yeah.
For you, I'm sure the typical day for you varies depending on the day, but like what's like a typical example of what a day for you would look like when you're training and teaching as well?
Sure. I probably get up at like 6, try to get so my school this year, I just switched schools, and the school that I'm at now, starts about an hour earlier than my old school, which has been tricky, for sure. It gets out earlier too, so I get to practice earlier, which was a consideration in the decision to make the move. But because it's now dark in the mornings, and I really hate running when it's dark outside. Just want to say I hate the treadmill, and so I would rather just wait, rather like move the blocks of things around, so that I can run when it's light out. So I usually head to the pool in the morning. And then right after school, so from the pool, go to school, and then right after school, head to practice. June, like the school year has like started as I was starting to kind of taper mileage down, so I didn't really have to run in the morning that much. But hopefully, with daylight savings and stuff, things will adjust a little bit, and I'll have time and daylight to run in the morning as well. But I usually double, and I'm usually in the pool about once a day. And then I try to do the strength work. It usually just feels better at the end of the day. So after school, practice, usually some strength work. If I haven't been to the pool yet, then I'll go to the pool. I try to get home by like 9, and then my husband is great about trying to like, remind me to keep it moving. Get dinner, decompress a little bit, play my New York Times, Wordle and spelling bee and connections and strands and all the puzzles, to kind of just chill. And then I try to get to bed as early as I can. I feel like the sleep is the thing that I worry the most about, because it's really hard to get more than 8 hours of sleep. And in the weeks before the marathon, I was trying to take naps on the weekends. But that's, I feel like, the biggest area for growth and for improvement is I could definitely do better with the sleep. But that's pretty much what a typical day looks like.
Do you and your husband both play the Wordle and the connections together? Do y'all get competitive?
Sort of. I know what his opener is for Wordle, and so he used to send me his thing, but then like I have like 100 plus, like I get it in one because I know what his opener is. So really it's 2, but he stopped sending me his score and his boxes because I kept on racking up the like getting the hole in one. But yeah, sometimes at the end of the day, he'll start to try to give me hints because he wants me to like, okay, like you need to be done. You need to go to bed. And so I've been trying to do it at lunch now so that I can tell him like, I'm done. You can't spoil this. I got it honestly. So, yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I love that. Obviously, again, you just went through some of your routine as being a teacher and balancing everything. But I'm also curious. I know you're sponsored by TCS, and you work alongside, I believe, their Team TCS Teachers Program, where I believe that gives a select number of teachers the opportunity to race in, some TCS marathons. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that program and your involvement and what that's been like as well?
Yeah, sure. It's a great program. It's really like just an amazing community. So yeah, essentially what happens is the teachers will, a couple years ago, they had to like record videos, but now it's just like an essay contest, and it's pretty competitive. And the essays are like, I haven't been a judge of them, but seen samples of them, and they're really incredible. And a lot of these teachers who end up winning have really been able to kind of articulate how they blend running and yeah, and bring their passion for running into the classroom. A lot of them sponsor running clubs at their schools and things like that. And so, yeah, there's it's split over. There's the most teachers go to the TCS New York City Marathon in November, but this coming weekend, actually in a couple hours, I'm leaving for Toronto to be with a group of teachers that are running the Toronto Waterfront Marathon that TCS sponsors. And then there were also some who are in Chicago because TCS is the tech sponsor for Chicago. They do the marathon app. And so this group of teachers just kind of gets a VIP experience. Like in New York, it's insane. They, get taken to the start area in a coach bus, and then there's like a hospitality tent, and it's they're treated like VIPs. They're treated, I probably like the elites are treated at the beginning of a marathon. So that's fun. And then at the end of it, the Tavern on the Green is right at the New York City marathon finish line. And so then they're like whisked off the finish line and into this party where there's massage and there's medal engraving and there's like I feel like I need to run the marathon there just so that I can justify like the massive amounts of food that I eat that day. But I'm going to run the 5K the day before, so it's fine. But the whole afternoon is just like dessert bars and like pancakes and a taco bar and burgers and pizza, and it's amazing. And it's just like an awesome party at the end. But in the lead up to the marathon, we have we have a Facebook private group, and then there's also these like virtual happy hours that happen about every other week, where people just pop in and ask questions about what kind of gels people are using, or, what kind of shoes people are wearing at work because they're on their feet constantly. Or, I think just kind of like reassuring each other that like, maybe you didn't get in the run that you wanted to that day, either distance or the quality of it, but you were also on your feet for, 5 or 6 or 7 hours that day. And so that's got to be worth something. And so I think there's just a lot of like mutual admiration for what the others are doing. The teachers are from all over the country and in Canada. So it's also just kind of fun to hear kind of what the issues of the day are, and the perspectives from different places and different grade levels and different subject matters. Because, teaching has changed a lot since the pandemic, and it is sometimes quite emotionally draining. So it's good to have a community of people that like get that and are also trying to train at a high level. So.
Yeah, I mean, that program sounds just super cool, and really cool to hear and learn more about that from you. To go back a little bit, just looking at Chicago, but also just full circle for your whole marathoning career, I guess you could say as well. Like, have you had a chance to really reflect on the progression you've had? I believe you ran your first marathon, I think, in 2016 in LA. I think you ran 2:41 there. And you've dropped time significantly since then, and now you're sub 22 in Chicago a few days ago. Like, for you, what's that journey? Having a chance to look back on it, like, what's that journey been like for you?
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. I mean, I ran my first marathon with grandma's to qualify for the trials in LA. And I ran 2:35 there, and I mean, it was just, I fell in love with the marathon. Like in my very first one, there was just such amazing camaraderie. There's a guy, he lives in North Carolina, but he was running grandma's, and he came alongside me at around 15, and just like chatted with me for, until about mile 20. And then a woman passed me, and I started to surge to go with her. And he was like, no, don't do that. Don't do that at all. Like, it's your first marathon. Like, you don't do any kind of racing until the last mile. Like, just survive your first one. And I think that was really good advice. This was pre-super shoes. And so I think that the fact that my first one was, I mean, 2:35. I feel like I was happy with it. But I also felt like I left it feeling like, oh, I had so much more to give but I'm also glad that my first one was one where I just like didn't didn't end up like doing a death march the last 10K. And then yeah, LA was fine. I feel like I competed well there. And then after that, there was just kind of a rough patch of injuries. I was rear-ended on my way to work in 2017, and it was a mess. Like it took a really long time to figure out what had even happened. My high hamstrings were really hurting. I had pulled them, I guess, a little. There had been like some damage at the sit bone with the connections, but it ended up being an impinged nerve in my pelvic floor and like a whole thing. And that got me into like a whole different level of strength training and Pilates and stuff. And I wasn't familiar with that. So I feel like it's been really cool that like I feel like each marathon I've learned a lot from, and there have been some like real speed bumps along the way that I've also learned a lot from. So um, I feel excited that like things. I started working with the coach, my coach Andrew Gerard. He's at George Mason University. I started working with him in 2020, and I feel like since then it's kind of like taken off. My training changed a lot. Started running a lot more miles. My long runs just got to be a much higher quality than they had been previously. There's just been so many things that have been like just a huge advancement, kind of in the ways that I've trained and that, a lot more cross training and stuff like that. But I feel like I've been like the last several have, there's been like bigger chunks of time taken off, and I still feel like there's more to give. So that's exciting.
And I mean, shoot too, if you're looking within the past couple of years, I mean, you've also, you ran at the World Championships as well. So you've been part of a world team, and you've signed with Brooks as well, being part of that Brooks team now too, which I think that's, a testament to all the work you, like you just said, all the changes you've seen in your career and the advancements as well. We're coming up on another world year very soon. Is that something you're looking to make too again, is hopefully compete at Worlds again?
I mean, if this time holds up, I would love to. I mean, I feel like it was so meaningful for me to be named to the World Championship team in Budapest, and then to show up and for it to be basically a disaster was just heartbreaking. My knee started hurting right before it, but I really feel like it actually broke probably during the race, because there was a moment where like there was a jolt of pain, and I saw stars, and I thought, okay, something's seriously wrong now. And I would love to get back and wear the Team USA singlet again, and redeem myself, and then put on a good show, because I feel like Budapest, definitely there needs to be some redemption from that. So,
well, hopefully we can see you in a Team USA singlet next year at Worlds. But before we let you go, more immediately, where can fans hopefully see you competing next?
I'm hoping to run the Abbott Dash to the Finish at the New York City Marathon weekend. It's definitely a changing gears kind of situation, and I don't really know how race sharp I will be. I think we're just going to kind of focus on recovery between now and then. But I did the same thing 2 years ago, and I had a lot of fun. It was awesome to not have any pressure, because it was like if it goes really poorly, I just blame the marathon. And if it goes really well, then it's icing on the cake. So yeah, my coach and I haven't really had a chance to put things on the calendar. I've kind of thrown out my wish list. But he's very good at figuring out how to get me from point A to point B. And sometimes that doesn't involve getting all the races that I want to race on the calendar. So we'll see. But I think the Abbott Dash to the Finish is the next one, because I'm going to be in New York for the marathon weekend.
Well, I know we'll all be excited to see you race there and whatever's next for you. Susanna, thank you again so much for taking some time to chat with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
What a wonderful interview there with Susanna Sullivan, again, 7th place in the top finisher on the U.S. side at the Chicago Marathon. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for the FloTrack Podcast.